Xerxes, the Great King, born to Atassa, son of Darius, grandson of Cyrus, took the throne in the 10th month of the year 486 B.C.E. In his years on the throne, he destroyed rebels against Persian authority, punished the Greeks for their insolence, built great palaces and temples to the gods, and maintained Persian strength across the vast lands of the known earth. That's what Xerxes' story would sound like if we heard it from the Persians, but instead, we hear it from the Greeks, and so it goes like this. Xerxes was taking over from his father Darius, who had brought Persia to its greatest territorial extent, but nevertheless left many things unfinished. First on the agenda was a major revolt in Egypt, where Darius was marching when he died in 486. Xerxes took the army that Darius had been assembling and marched it on Egypt. It took him about a year to suppress the revolt, which he did in early 484 BCE. This left him with time to deal with the Greeks, who had dealt the Persians their first major battlefield defeat since the death of Cyrus almost 50 years earlier. According to Herodotus, Xerxes was convinced by his close advisor and general, a man named Mardonius, who urgently pressed for the conquest of the Greek mainland. Xerxes was then visited by conflicting dream visions, eventually resolving that he would bring an army to destroy the Greeks. It took Xerxes 4 years to assemble his great army, but at the beginning of the year 480, he was finally ready to march. In preparation for the crossing into Europe, Xerxes had his engineers and army undertake 2 massive projects. The first was an even larger repeat of Darius's bridge of boats. Xerxes constructed 2 sets of pontoon bridges across the Hellespont. Herodotus says that the first set of bridges was destroyed by a storm, which caused Xerxes to punish the ocean. He had the Dardanelles whipped and branded with hot irons before ordering the bridges reconstructed. The second time, the ocean did not dare disrupt his progress. Xerxes also dug a canal at Mount Athos in Greece to allow his ships to avoid dangerous waters. It was 30 meters wide, 3 meters deep, and about 2 kilometers long. Modern archaeological surveys have established its existence. The project was undertaken in a remarkably short period of time and represented the immense resources and efficiency of the Persian Empire. When Xerxes marched across the Hellespont, it took his army 7 days and 7 nights uninterrupted. Herodotus says that a man approached Xerxes, believing him to be Zeus, and spoke thus: "O Zeus, why hast thou taken the likeness of a Persian man and changed thy name to Xerxes, leading the whole world with thee to remove Hellas from its place?" Xerxes' army met with little resistance as it marched through northern Greece. Macedon was already under Persian rule, and many cities in northern Greece submitted to Persian authority once the Persian army arrived. Most notably, Thebes, a powerful Greek city that had the best cavalry in the Greek world, sided with the Persians and supplied soldiers to Xerxes' army. The alliance of Greek cities, which included Athens and Sparta, were faced with a difficult situation. They opted to defend a crucial pass at Thermopylae, through which Xerxes would have to pass to get to Athens. Holding the pass were the Spartans, at the head of a coalition army, led by their king Leonidas. In the meantime, the civilians of Athens were evacuated by sea to the Peloponnese, as they would be entirely vulnerable in the case of failure at Thermopylae. The Persians attacked at the pass, but the narrow distance and flat ground between the hills and the sea, combined with the fortifications that the Greeks had constructed, allowed the Greeks to easily hold the Persians at bay despite an extreme numerical disadvantage. Herodotus says there were 2.5 million Persian soldiers and an equal number of camp followers, but these numbers are absurd. Modern estimates place the Persian numbers, combatants and camp followers, at above 100,000, which would still make this army possibly the largest ever assembled at that point in history. By contrast, the Greeks only had about 7,000 soldiers. The Spartans and associates held the Persians off for over 2 weeks, but eventually they were betrayed. Xerxes learned of a pass through the mountains that outflanked the Greek position. Upon realizing that he had been betrayed, Leonidas ordered most of his army to flee, standing his ground with his 300 elite guards and a few hundred others to fight a suicidal rearguard action. While the Persians did win a victory at Thermopylae, which left the path to Athens wide open, the delaying actions of the Greeks at the pass gave the rest of the allies important time to fortify the narrow isthmus of Corinth, giving them a chance to hold the Persians at bay. This was likely little consolation to the citizens of Athens, who were now refugees. Xerxes marched in, tore the walls down, and looted the city as a punishment for the Athenians' insolence. At sea, the Greeks received good news. The Persian fleets, seeking naval supremacy, had pursued the Greek ships into a narrow strait between the Greek mainland and the island of Salamis. There, the Greeks decisively defeated a numerically superior Persian fleet, thwarting Persian attempts to march on the Peloponnese. This battle came towards the end of the campaigning season, leaving both sides to prepare for the following year. Xerxes would not be with the army, though. He left his army, taking many of the soldiers with him, and returned to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius to finish prosecuting the campaign. It's unclear why he did this. Herodotus claims it was on account of Xerxes' personal cowardice, but I think it's more likely that Xerxes was concerned about his army's supply. If he really had hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Europe, supplied only by tenuous supply lines that were now under threat by the Greek navy, it makes sense that he would scale back his campaign for fear of the greater catastrophe that would result from a severe supply shortage. In any case, the conquest of Greece was not to be. Negotiations took place between Mardonius and the Greeks in early 479, but the Athenians rejected any terms for Persian rule in Greece and pushed for an attack from the coalition army on the Persians. The Greeks mustered a large hoplite army for the 479 campaigning season and marched out from the Isthmus of Corinth to face Mardonius in battle. At Plataea, the superiority of Greek heavy infantry again proved itself over the Persian army. Despite an advantage in cavalry, and despite having hoplites on their side, the Persians were unable to bear the weight of the Greek attack, and their army crumbled. Mardonius himself was killed in the fighting, and the Persian army was routed. On the same day, the Greek fleets won another decisive battle against the army that was guarding the Persian fleet at Mycale. The infantry combat was the same story as Plataea, with the entire Persian army killed or captured, and the Persian ships burned. These two victories at Plataea and Mycale ended the Persian hegemony in Greece, and in fact, in all of Europe. Upon hearing of these defeats, the king of Macedon betrayed the Persians and eliminated the remnants of their defeated army. The Persians were mostly pushed out of Europe by the end of 479, and cities on the Ionian coast were regaining their independence from Persian authority. Further conflicts between the Persians and the new Greek alliance, the Delian League, would continue for the next few decades. The Greeks never succeeded in pushing far into Persian territory, while the Persians never made another attempt to conquer Greece. And from here, our story just ends. Until Xerxes died in 465, a full decade and a half later, we have no information on what he did. He was, by the way, assassinated through court intrigue. Xerxes' historical reputation, up until the modern era, was that he was a tyrant, morally depraved, and indulgent, lacking the character and moral fiber of his predecessors Cyrus and Darius. This image is drawn from the Greek narrative. However, among the Persians, he was seen as a great king because he maintained stability, constructed great buildings and roads in Persian cities, and achieved military success. Despite this great reputation, Xerxes the Great occupies an infamous place in history. Voltaire once said of great empires, "History is filled with the sound of silken slippers going downstairs and wooden shoes coming up." Xerxes, king of kings, was the first to wear the silk slippers.